Have you had people who come to you and you'd say to them, I don't think this is for you?
Well, 50% of my patients, I don't think it's for them, because 50% of my patients don't have a weight problem.
Okay, of the people who do have a weight problem.
That rarely happens. If the weight problem is serious, then I'm going to work on restricting carbohydrates. They may have some other problems. I never put any two people on the same diet because we do food allergy testing, so we know right from the very beginning which foods certain people have to avoid, and that's not the same in other people. And they may come in with a different problem. I don't want people to think that most people come to me with a weight problem. Only about 10% of the people come to me. It's because I am a cardiologist. Most of the time they come to me because they were told the same thing that David Letterman heard. You got to have a bypass, only these people weren't intimidated enough to get it right away. They came to see me, and 85% of those people didn't need a bypass after we went on our program. This is why I sort of resent the idea that people are saying that my diet is not heart healthy. If it were not heart healthy, we wouldn't be reversing heart disease and getting these people who were having chest pain on a little bit of exertion out there running and jogging a few months later.
This brings me to Dr. Ornish.
Okay. I've got a lot to say, not a lot of time to say it, so I'm not going to be very sociable. After analyzing virtually every scientific paper written on the low-carbohydrate diet over the last 80 years, beginning with when it was first offered as a treatment for epilepsy, I am convinced that a diet low enough in carbohydrate to automatically convert our stored fat into the body's primary energy fuel is qualified at present to be considered the treatment of choice for obesity and related conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, and atherosclerosis. I know that to gain mainstream acceptance of this proposal, I must first demonstrate that the nutritional program, which I believe can put an end to the lion's share of obesity right now, is both safe and effective over both the short and the long term. So in the brief time allotted, let me do just that. First, PowerPoint. This is how the Atkins diet works. Now, I can't see if the PowerPoint is up. Can you put it on the monitor there so I can see that it's there? Stored fat is, after carbohydrate, the body's backup fuel system. The human body cannot store more than a 2-day supply of carbohydrate. In the absence of dietary carbohydrate, fat becomes the primary fuel. It's next on the pecking order. This metabolic changeover is supported by biochemical catalysts which facilitate the steady burning of fat, producing more energy, increased well-being, and a dramatic loss of appetite. Next. What are ketones? They're simply the energy fuels derived from our fat stores. Fat delivers energy via ketones just as carbohydrate delivers energy by way of glucose. Enzymes are present within all our cells, including our brain cells, to convert ketones into usable fuel. Next. When ketones are used as fuel, the most consistent finding is a decrease in appetite. Insulin is not involved in ketone production. Thus, the consequences of elevated insulin, which are many, there are increases in triglycerides, in blood pressure, in adrenaline, in cortisol, all of these are avoided. Obese individuals and people who are overweight are keto resistant. Pay attention to this term, but what it means is that there will be no accumulation of ketones in the blood. Next. The best documentation of keto resistance was brought to us by two very important researchers, the department heads at London's Middlesex Hospital, Alan Keckwick and Gaston Pawan. In their documentation, they showed that obese subjects given the ketogenic diet that I'll tell you about momentarily produced a flat level of ketones rising from 2 milligrams to an average of 4 milligrams, never more than 6, whereas the non-obese subjects had their ketones escalate rapidly. This is one reason why overweight people will never have problems with ketosis. But Ketosis is a negative catchword for many people. The only reason can possibly be that they're confusing it with diabetic ketoacidosis. Next slide. But look how diametrically opposed they are. Ketoacidosis occurs in type 1 diabetes, meaning it occurs because of an insulin absence or an insulin deficiency. Benign ketosis is achieved in overweight subjects whose metabolism is characterized by the fact that they put out too much insulin. Ketoacidosis is caused by an increased intake of carbohydrate. Benign ketosis by a decreased intake of carbohydrate. There is, of course, acidosis in ketoacidosis, but in benign dietary ketosis, the pH is normal. There is no acidosis. In ketoacidosis, patients are extremely symptomatic, and in ketosis, the subjects describe an improvement in well-being. Now, that's pretty different. Don't let anybody confuse it ever again. Much of the success of the low-carbohydrate diet is that it is extremely effective for people with large appetites who enjoy eating. And these are the two main reasons why. First, hunger is eliminated. Hunger is not even allowed. Hunger is eliminated because the biochemical changes I will outline momentarily reduce the appetite. Secondly, and this is something that bears emphasis, more weight is lost on low-carbohydrate diets than on balanced diets identical in calories. This benefit is called metabolic advantage. And we're going to look at these two phenomena right now. First, we'll look at the hunger aspect. The guru of fasting, next slide. The guru of fasting is a weight loss system, Dr. Garfield Duncan. Back in the 60s, when fasting was in vogue, he described a dramatic decrease in hunger after the second day of a fast. He attributed this to high levels of ketones. In his words, in every case, there was a relationship between hyperketonemia and loss of appetite. In 1963, Walter Lyons Bloom, next slide, it's not a slide, but anyway, Walter Lyons Bloom and Gordon Azar in Atlanta discovered that the same degree of ketosis could be achieved simply by eating protein and fat-containing foods and eliminating carbohydrate. There was no need to fast. Instead of a fast, a meat and salad diet would do the trick. Therefore, carbohydrate restriction will suppress the appetite. Bloom and Azar's paper convinced me to go on the only diet I've ever been on. That was 36 years ago, and I'm still counting, and I'm still on it. But here's the second point. Is a calorie really true? This axiom that everybody repeats, is it really true? The truly significant breakthrough came from Kekwik and Pawan. After a series of animal experiments, including the discovery that rats on a low-carbohydrate diet put out a fat-mobilizing substance which, when injected into other animals, caused an automatic weight loss, they directed their attention to obese humans. Two groundbreaking studies were published in '56. Next. First, they studied 1,000-calorie diets, but it was a research study that they had done on rats, and this is what they did. There were diets 90% fat, 90% protein, 90% carbohydrate. They wanted to see the effect. 1,000 calories of 90% carbohydrate produced no weight loss. As a matter of fact, there was a slight weight gain. The 90% protein diet produced a weight loss between 3.5 and 4 pounds in the week that people followed it. The 90% fat diet did even better. Between 5 and 6 pounds of weight were lost. And that is a dramatic portrayal of how different foods can lead to different amounts of weight loss. But of course these were all 1,000-calorie diets, and they wanted to look at diets with sufficient calories not to provide guaranteed weight loss. Next. So look at this one. Look at this one. For an average of 8 days, 6 subjects were alternated between a 2,000-calorie balanced diet and a 2,600 low-carbohydrate diet. The 2,000 calorie balanced diet led to a 1 pound weight gain, as you see on this slide, whereas the 2,600 calorie low carbohydrate diet given to this very same subjects, it was a crossover study, produced a 3 pound weight loss in the same amount of time. And Keckwick and Pawan did water balance studies, and it wasn't water. The mathematics, a half a pound of day more weight loss is 1,750 calories of advantage, plus the 600 in the extra food. This provided an edge totaling 2,350 calories per day. That means they demonstrated for the first time a phenomenon called metabolic advantage, a refutation of the calorie theory where diets of different compositions lead to disproportionate weight loss. Keckwick and Pawan, despite their important academic position, were met with skepticism. But 9 years later, Dr. Fred Benoit and his colleagues at Oakland Naval Hospital furthered the concept. Their technology allowed them to measure body fat. And this is what they found. Next. They compared a total fast, which certainly was in vogue in those days, with a 1,000 calorie, 10 gram, very low carbohydrate diet for 10 days. They found that the fasting took off 21 pounds, but only 7.5 of those pounds were fat. The other 14 were lean body mass. The low carbohydrate diet, despite the extra 1,000 calories, took off 14.5 pounds, all but 1/2 pound of which was fat. Virtually none was lean body mass. Again, it met with skepticism, but it was quite logical. In starvation, you will start to burn your protein for fuel, but when ample fat and protein are included in the diet, there will be no need to do so. More skepticism and more studies. This time, the professor of medical nutrition at Cornell, Dr. Charlotte Young, studied 8 obese 23-year-old men, undergraduates at Cornell and graduate students at Cornell. They were all overweight, and she used an 1,800 calorie diet. May I see the next? An 1,800 calorie diet of differing amounts of carbohydrate. One was 104, moderately low, one was 60, even lower, and the other was 30 grams of carbohydrate a day. She also did body fat estimations. This is how much body fat they lost. 2 pounds a week for the 9 weeks on the 104 gram diet, 2.5 pounds a week on the 60 gram diet, and 3.6 pounds per week on the 30 gram diet. This means that cutting down from 60 to 30 grams, from low to even lower, without cutting calories, led to an extra 10.5 pounds of fat being lost in the 9 weeks of the study. I hope I've proven that the diet is effective. So now, let's turn our attention to the safety. Over the years, I've heard myriad concerns, but very little in the way of observed complaints. In fact, in 1973, the AMA requested that its members be on the lookout for adverse effects from my diet and report them to AMA headquarters. 3 years later, when we checked, despite the fact that millions had been on my diet, no examples of adverse reactions were in their files. None. Some complaints, by the way, that organs, such as the kidneys or the liver, are damaged by the diet must be dismissed immediately as being total inventions, fashioned out of the whole cloth. Not a single case of kidney or liver damage was ever reported, even as an isolated case history. The major issue then seems to be the speculation that it would be bad for the heart. I hope you agree that it's not the cholesterol and fat in the diet that leads to heart disease, but rather the cholesterol and fat in the blood. If so, we can review the changes in the lipid profile on low carbohydrate diets. They fall into a common pattern. The total cholesterol usually drops a bit, and there's usually a tendency for the HDL to rise and the LDL to fall, much as a recent study out of Wilming, Delaware, on a modified low carbohydrate diet shows. Next. In this particular, I don't know where the slide is, but it's, here we go. In this particular study, all the lipid variables moved in the right direction. You will notice that these people lost a lot of weight And the first group that I'm about to show you, the changes were fairly dramatic. Next one. Another group was done with more people who lost very little weight, but they had a major effect on their blood sugar. They were diabetics. However, again, every single one of the parameters, the cholesterol, the triglycerides, the LDL, all went down and the HDL went up. Okay, now most of the other studies throughout the years, and I've reviewed the literature, and it goes back to the 50s and 60s, there are about 10 of them, report a striking improvement in triglycerides particularly. And I want to talk about triglycerides because this is much more important than you might imagine. It's logical, by the way, that it should be beneficial in controlling triglycerides because body fat, biochemically, is triglyceride, and we know that the diet causes a loss of body fat. The first demonstration of this, next, was very dramatic, and it dates back to 1966. It was done at Harvard, P.K. Roussel and his colleagues. That one doesn't look like it. Better do one more. Is that it? I can't see it. The subjects had very high triglycerides in Roussel's study. Their triglycerides ranged from 500 and up, and a typical fall was from 1,300 down to 300. And then there were many, many other studies which I don't have time to show, but you can be sure that high triglycerides are corrected by a low-carbohydrate diet. The impact of, may I see the next slide? No, we are, all right, we'll leave that one. The impact of high triglycerides cannot be underestimated. Let's look at another Harvard study, this one very recent, published in Circulation, October '97. Gaziano was a senior article. He took 340 patients who survived a myocardial infarction and got out of the hospital. They were compared with age and sex-matched controls. Of all the lipids studied, and they studied every lipid there was, they were most fascinated by the elevation of triglycerides combined with a low level of the good cholesterol, the HDL. This is what the study showed. They divided them into quartiles of this ratio, triglyceride to HDL. The lowest quartile, or the most ideal number, so to speak, was given a factor of 1. He was assigned that number. Then 4.1 times more of that group in the second quartile were in the heart attack group, 5.8 times in the third quartile, but in the fourth quartile, the upper 25%, there was 16 times more likelihood of being in the heart attack group if you had high triglycerides combined with low HDL. This is the most powerful risk factor for heart disease ever described. If you look at what cholesterol does, it's maybe 2 to 1. If you look at what homocysteine does, maybe 5 to 1. But 16 to 1, this is what you must be looking for if you want to reverse heart disease. Next PowerPoint. The importance of high triglycerides, then, is that they are perhaps the most important cardio risk factor at all. But they are a known surrogate marker for hyperinsulinism. Now, we haven't talked about hyperinsulinism, but a lot of people have. High triglycerides and low HDL are surrogates for this phenomenon. You do see, by the way, the same incidence of high heart attack rates when you study insulin levels as well. Even more important is that triglycerides are a known responder to carbohydrate restriction. Now, next, we've done a retrospective study on 319 subjects at the Atkins Center. I'm going to really skip most of it. We don't have time. I just want to point out that in the group of 85 people who had triglycerides of over 150, the value 1 year later was less than 50% of what it was at the beginning of the study. Just go the next two, skip the next one, and we'll go on to the next. To dismiss the complaint that the Atkins diet skimps on fruits and vegetables, I would like to point out that it is nutritionally naive to lump fruits and vegetables together. there is a wide variance in their phytochemical content. In my latest book, Age Defying, I deal with this issue. Carbohydrates per se are not nutritionally essential, only the phytochemicals that they contain. Future dieters will be instructed to select foods with a high antioxidant to carbohydrate ratio. The best phytochemicals act as antioxidants, and this is a very good study. By the way, it was done out of Tufts, and I wonder if it was done from the USDA. I hope it was, because this work is very, very valuable. Let's look at the PowerPoint that shows it. There are two of them. I can't see whether that's on or not, but...
That's the retrospective study.
Then one more. Yeah, I know it's in color. Okay. These are the foods that have the highest ratio of antioxidants done by the Tufts study per gram of carbohydrate. Look at fruits and vegetables were studied. Go to the next one just briefly, and then back to this one. All right, now you see there's a lot of blue in the next one. That's the lower half. Back to the previous one. And you see that the top of the list are foods like garlic, kale, onions, leafy greens, spinach. These are the foods with the highest ratios. The only fruits on the list were berries. If we now turn to the next list, you're going to see the bottom of the list. You're going to see that things like apples and pears and bananas have a reading of 0.2, and yet kale a reading of 6.5. So that if you pick the right green vegetables, you will do 30 times better than if you pick the wrong fruits. One leaf of lettuce has double the antioxidant power as an entire banana. And so let's no longer lump fruits and vegetables together. Let's learn to be selective and pick the vegetables that work. All right, next PowerPoint. And now we have to deal with the accusation that the Atkins diet is low in vitamin and mineral content. Here's an example of a 2,000 calorie version of my strictest diet from the standpoint of carbohydrate. Only has 20 grams. Starts with a 3-egg omelet, avocado and cheese and tomato and 2 strips of bacon and so on. You can read the rest. I hope you can. I can't from here, but maybe you can. All right. I want to show how it measures up to the RDI, which stands for the recommended daily intake of 12 different vitamins. Next, please. You see that black line? That's 100%. These are 12 vitamins. 9 of the vitamins go way over that line. 2 of them are virtually at the line, and only one, panacetic acid, is at the 50% mark. And it's a question of whether we can do better. Now, I personally believe in nutritional supplements for everyone. I believe that people on the food pyramid diet need nutritional supplements a lot more than people on the Atkins diet. And so if I tell people to take nutritional supplements, it's not because my diet is inadequate. It's because they were on an inadequate diet before they started my diet. Okay, now the main question about the long-term studies. No one has one. There are no long-term studies showing that any diet for weight reduction is both effective and safe. Mostly, it's not hard to show that they're safe, by the way, but none have been shown to be effective. To be effective, they must be followed. They must be easy and pleasant enough to follow. The recidivism rate of most diets falls into the 95% range, which indicates that very few people want to follow them. I predict that my diet will be the first diet to achieve the long-term effectiveness award. And the reason is, see the next PowerPoint. The reason is that it is easy to follow. It's easy to comply with. You're never hungry. You have a metabolic advantage. You can take in more calories than you can on other diets and still lose weight. You can go to restaurants, order from the best of the main courses. You can eat in luxuriously. and it will correct an awful lot of other health problems. It will correct diabetes, hypertension, most of the risk factors for heart disease, gastritis, esophageal reflux disorder, headaches, and a variety of other problems. And for all of these reasons, I hope, the reason I'm here, by the way, is to help the people of our nation and of our planet. And I hope that this misinformation that people have had to abide by, all of the statements that a low-carbohydrate diet is scientifically unsupported, I hope we've put an end to that this morning. And I hope that some government official will decide, okay, it's pretty clear that long-term studies are going to have to be funded by the government, and that they will do that. And when they do, they will begin to get some exciting results, much as Dr. Eric Westman has gotten in his short-term studies, and I hope we can hear from him. Thank you.
Dr. Sears, your time begins now.
Thank you. Presently, we have an epidemic spreading across our land that threatens to destroy our entire healthcare system. Currently, 55% of all American adults are overweight. Obesity has increased by 50% in the last 7 years, and more than 300,000 Americans die each year due to excess body fat. The question is, what has caused this epidemic? We've been told for the last 20 years that dietary fat is the villain. And the question is, we have basically pulled dietary fat out of our diet, as shown as the first slide. I hope that basically is up there. It's there. Unfortunately, it's not down here. As you can see from that slide, is that over the last several decades, we have reduced the amount of fat in our diet as percent of calories. But this leads to what I call the American paradox. That is, we are reducing the amount of fat in our diet, yet we are becoming the fattest people on the face of the earth, and this trend is accelerating. 3 of our most renowned nutritional researchers looked at this very carefully, reviewed all the long-term studies, and wrote a report published 2 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine. And in this report, they came to 2 conclusions. The first was replacement of fat by carbohydrate has not been shown to reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. They also came to the conclusion that beneficial effects of high carbohydrate diets on the risk of cancer or body weight have also not been substantiated. In essence, they're quoting that great scientist, Jerry Maguire, saying, show me the data. Because they're saying there is no data that very low fat, high carbohydrate diets have significant health benefits when viewed from a scientific perspective. Now, if dietary fat is not the villain, what is the cause of our epidemic of obesity in our land? The answer is, it's not excess dietary fat, it's excess levels of the hormone insulin. Dr. Atkins would agree with me, and even Dr. Ornish would agree with me indirectly from a quote that he had published in JAMA, stating that insulin also accelerates conversion of calories into triglycerides, stimulates cholesterol synthesis, and may enhance the proliferation of arterial smooth muscle cells. What we have to do to understand this epidemic is now view food from a new perspective. View food no longer as a source of calories, which it is, but really view food as a drug. And this is shown on the next slide. And now we have to view this from the standpoint of not only a powerful drug, but probably the most powerful drug anyone will ever encounter. Because we have to look at food now from what will be the hormonal effects on the diet. Each time you eat, whatever you eat, is composed of macronutrients. What are macronutrients? Carbohydrates, protein, and fat. The power of nutrition in the 21st century is looking at what the appropriate combination of those macronutrients are to give the most ideal hormonal response. My background, as Carolyn has pointed out, is I'm not a nutritionist. My background is the development of intravenous drug delivery systems for cancer patients, where you try to keep drugs in therapeutic zones. I began to apply that philosophy to food some 20 years ago, to treat food as if it were a drug, to maintain a therapeutic zone. In essence, primarily for the hormone insulin, keeping it within a zone, not too high, but not too low. Now, from the standpoint, we are not all genetically the same when it comes to how we handle carbohydrates. Is that slide up there, I'm guessing? This is work done at Stanford Medical School nearly 13 years ago, taking normal weight individuals who had no disease and gave them different loads, give them the same load of sugar. And you can see that on the left-hand side of this slide, their sugar levels went up and they came down. Nothing remarkable about that. But on the right-hand side of the slide, a very different picture emerges. There was about 1/4 of the population whose insulin levels never went up very high, and they came back to baseline very quickly. These are the genetic lucky ones, because they can eat a high carbohydrate diet and never have the ill effects of excess insulin production. However, the other 75% of the American population will not be so genetically lucky. As they consume more and more carbohydrates, they will create more and more insulin, and it's excess insulin that makes you fat and keeps you fat. How can you tell which of those two groups you fall into? A very simple test. Have a big bowl of pasta at noon and see how you feel at 3 o'clock. If you can barely keep your eyes open and you're falling asleep and you're hungry, then you know you fall in that category of the 75% of Americans who genetically have a predisposition to make lots of insulin. But having a predisposition to make insulin is different than hyperinsulinemia, where your insulin levels are chronically elevated. This is shown on the next slide. Because many of our major disease states, coronary heart disease, the #1 killer of males and females in America, are related to hyperinsulinemia, as is type 2 diabetes. That's the definition of a type 2 diabetic, somebody who's hyperinsulinemic. Likewise, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, polycystic ovary syndrome, the primary cause of infertility in women, and obesity are all caused by excess insulin. Now, this is why we're concerned about obesity in our landscape. If it was simply a cosmetic problem, no one would care. But the fact is, a greater number of deaths, as I said earlier, over 300,000 a year can be attributed to excess body fat because of the effect of excess insulin on cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Let me show you some data that supports my contention that excess insulin is one of our primary predictors. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine some 4 years ago. Taking patients who had no trace of heart disease and following them for a 5-year period, and then asking what in the blood predicted who would or would not develop heart disease. It was not high cholesterol. It was not high blood pressure. It was slight elevations of insulin, which could predict with frightening certainty, as you can see by that P factor there, who would and who would not develop heart disease. Another study has demonstrated, looking again, a prospective study looking at individuals who had no trace of heart disease and followed them for a 5-year period, and again asked what blood parameters were most predictive of heart disease. It turns out that by far and away the most predictive was increased levels of fasting insulin. This is followed by increased levels of triglycerides and even increased levels of LDL cholesterol. The so-called bad cholesterol were not nearly as predictive. But if you don't measure insulin levels, are there any other blood parameters that can be markers of insulin? It turns out the ratio of triglycerides to HDL cholesterol is a very good surrogate marker for insulin. As insulin levels increase, triglyceride levels increase. As insulin levels increase, HDL levels decrease. This is the work that Dr. Atkins had talked about from Harvard Medical School, looking at people who had survived heart attacks and matched them with individuals who had not. And we can see a dramatic increase in the likelihood of a heart attack the higher the ratio of triglycerides to HDL cholesterol. If you have high cholesterol, you are twice as likely to get a heart attack. We have made a national war against cholesterol. If you smoke, You are 4 times more likely to get a heart attack. We have made a national war against smoking. But according to Harvard Medical School, if you have high levels of triglyceride to HDL, which is really a surrogate marker for insulin, so we can say if you have high levels of insulin, you are 16 times more likely to get a heart attack, yet we hear nothing about the war on reducing hyperinsulinemia. And until that war is fought successfully, we will continue to become fatter and more likely to develop heart disease. Well, if we do have hyperinsulinemia, how do you treat it? Well, there is one drug that does exist. That drug is called food. But you have to treat food with the same respect you would treat any prescription drug. And part of our trouble, why we have debates like these, we don't have good definitions. We have to have a definition of what diets are. And that's why we talk about putting a mathematical precision behind the zone diet. We couldn't call a high carbohydrate diet is any diet that has more than double the amount of grams of carbohydrate relative to the grams of protein. We can call a high protein diet any diet that has more grams of protein compared to grams of carbohydrate. Between those two extremes lies the zone. We're looking at balancing protein and carbohydrate no different than you're balancing a carburetor of a car. Because if you have high levels of carbohydrate in your diet and you're genetically predisposed to develop high levels of insulin, that will lead to fat accumulation and increased likelihood of cardiovascular disease. On the other hand, if you're following a high carbohydrate diet, a high protein diet, you will increase the production of the hormone glucagon, and that will lead to ketosis. So we could call the zone diet is that diet that stands just beyond ketosis and before you reach hyperinsulinemia, but better to put it on a mathematical format and now look at the literature, the scientific literature that supports that concept, that controlling the ratio of protein to carbohydrate will lower insulin and will decrease heart disease. The first of these studies actually appeared last year from Harvard Medical School. They took adolescent, overweight boys who were already hyperinsulinemic, and they gave them meals of equal number of calories. The only difference was the ratio of protein to carbohydrate. When they consumed the high carbohydrate meal, their insulin levels for the next 4 hours were highly elevated. When they consumed the zone meal, their insulin levels had been decreased by nearly 50%. And again, with a high degree of statistical significance. My work has primarily focused on type 2 diabetics, because I said earlier, they're characterized by high levels of insulin. Is the slide up there? Yes, it is. This is one study we did for an HMO in Texas, taking their elderly type 2 diabetic patients and putting them on a zone diet for a 6-week period of time. What you can see from the slide is several key factors. One, insulin levels dropped by some 23%. Notice the ratio of triglyceride to HDL cholesterol dropped by almost the equivalent amount. That's why I say that high levels of insulin and high levels of triglycerides to HDL are surrogate markers. And notice they also lost body fat. Because the only way you can lose excess body fat is to lower insulin. There's nothing magical about this. You have to lower insulin. Now, the key of science is not whether I do an experiment, it's whether can somebody else do the same experiment someplace else in the world and get the same results. Those results were actually replicated in Australia 2 years ago, when Australian investigators took both hyperinsulinemic overweight individuals and hyperinsulinemic type 2 diabetics and put them on a zone diet. And within 3 days, their levels of insulin had dropped dramatically. Another study published last year, looking at long-term effects, taking overweight individuals and put them on diets of equal number of calories. The only difference was the ratio of protein to carbohydrate. Those on the high carbohydrate diet lost less fat, actually almost 1/2 less fat, than those on the zone diet. And finally, the long-term aspects, we have data again from Harvard Medical School stating that on a high carbohydrate diet, you're more likely to get a heart attack than on his own diet. You're 26% less likely. Now, we say it's too hard to follow this program. All you need is your hand. Because all the rules we need is saying you never, ever eat any more low-fat protein at a meal than you put on the palm of your hand. That is 3 to 4 ounces. Every nutritionist in America agrees with that. Now, you take your plate at each meal, divide it into 3 sectors. On 1/3 of that plate, you put some low-fat protein, no bigger and no thicker than the palm of your hand. The other 2/3 of the plate, you fill it full of fruits and vegetables till it's overflowing. You add a dash of heart-healthy monounsaturated fat, and now you have a zone meal to keep insulin controlled for the next 4 to 6 hours. If we put this into a food pyramid, we get the zone food pyramid. Notice the base of this, you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables. How many? 10 to 15 servings a day, followed by low-fat protein, followed by small amounts of heart-healthy monounsaturated fat, and using grains and rices in moderation. We compare this to the USDA food pyramid. We see 2 different pyramids. One is almost guaranteed to increase insulin levels because of the high reliance on high-density carbohydrates such as grains and starches. And what about high-protein diets? The zone's been accused of that, but as you can see from this picture, there's really no relation between a high-protein diet and the zone diet, because the zone diet, you're eating more carbohydrates than protein, and the fat you are eating is heart-healthy monounsaturated fat as opposed to heart-unhealthy saturated fat. Millions of people have lost weight on high-protein diets. Unfortunately, the same millions have gained it back. The question is why? I think there are 3 reasons. The longer you stay in ketosis, you turn your cells into fat magnets. They accumulate body fat more readily. The more saturated fat you eat, you tend to basically make your cells more resistant to insulin. And finally, the longer you stay in ketosis, you begin to oxidize lipoproteins. So these are long-term consequences, which it begins to explain why high-protein diets fail. Now, Dr. Ornish will tell you later today that his diet has cured heart disease, reversed it. Let's say, what are the facts? This is the data he presented in 1995. Yes, his patients lost weight, but look at their HDL levels went down dramatically. Their triglyceride levels increased, and he said already earlier, been quoted, that that is due to basically high levels of insulin, increased triglycerides, and the ratio of triglycerides to HDL increased, and according to Harvard Medical School, that's not good. The lead author of that study was actually Kayland Gould, one of the leading cardiologists in our country, saying frequently triglyceride levels and HDL cholesterol levels decrease for individuals on a vegetarian high carbohydrate diet, since low HDL cholesterol, particularly of high triglycerides, incurs substantial risk of coronary events. I do not recommend a high carbohydrate diet. And the reason why, because 2 years later the data came out that those who followed the Ornish diet had twice the number of fatal heart attacks. Perhaps in Dr. Ornish's, when he speaks today, can explain how can you reverse heart disease and double the number of fatal heart attacks. And just one last slide. We want to take this whole debate out of the area of politics and make it a medical statement. The blood will tell you. Your blood will tell you whether you're naughty or nice. You want to keep your blood levels of insulin under 10 microunits per ml. If they're more than 15, change your diet. If you don't have an insulin levels, is the ratio of triglycerides to HDL, keep that under 2. If your numbers are in the right zone, I don't care if you're eating Pop-Tarts, keep eating the Pop-Tarts. They're working for you.
Thank you, Dr. Sears. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Bethea. What's happening that took sugar busters from the streets of New Orleans to the rest of the country?
Secretary Glickman, Ms. Watt, Secretary Glickman, Ms. Watson, Ms. O'Neill, fellow panelists, members of the USDA, guests and press. It's an honor for me to be here today to talk to you about sugar busters. And I will get started as soon as my slides come up. If you'd put it on the monitor, please. Could you put the slide on the monitor? Corn is for cattle and potatoes are for pigs. So say the French, more specifically Michel Montagnac. Michel Montagnac wrote Dine Out and Lose Weight, and he's the one who piqued our interest in the way the French have eaten for hundreds of years. Now, what is the French connection? Is it the wine? No, I really don't think so. Let's look at World Health Organizational data, age-adjusted. The French have less obesity, lower cholesterol, and fewer strokes and heart attacks than other westernized people. Why do we diet? We diet usually because of appearance and or our health. And when we speak of our health, it's usually the cardiovascular system. You've heard some of the other panelists speak of heart attacks. And that's how I got interested in the Sugar Busters concept, because I am a heart surgeon. Now let's look at the nutritional industry in the United States. Through 1998, we're spending $33 billion on diets, nutritional aids, additives, supplements, gimmicks, all kind of ways to lose weight. We're spending another $50 billion on health care costs directly attributable to obesity. And there's another $23 billion a year being spent annually, or lost, should I say, in wages, compensation, and other forms of remuneration because people are either in a hospital or going to see a doctor. That's over $100 billion a year problem for this country, simply stated because of fat. Now let's put things in perspective. I like to play golf. We're only spending $15 billion a year on golf, and that's after Tiger Woods. Now let's look at what that investment or cost has gotten us. Slide, please. In 1970, 1 in 5 Americans were overweight. In 1990, 1 in 3. In 1998, 1 in 2.5. And today, over half of our children are overweight. And this comes with a 16% reduction in fat intake. We're eating less fat and we're getting fatter. Let me show you something else even more alarming. Look at the increase in incidence of diabetes over that same period of time in the U.S. population. It has tripled. And look at your chance of becoming diabetic as you become more overweight. Now, does anybody have any idea why this is happening? Well, let's look at the consumption of refined sugar. You know, we didn't have refined sugar until about 500 AD. The Persians figured out how to refine it, but it was expensive and not readily available, and not many people could afford it. But by the 1900s, it became readily available and inexpensive, and look at the graph. Through 1994, Americans were consuming about 150 pounds of added refined sugar a year. That's over 1/3 of a pound a day. Now, that's not broccoli and asparagus and cauliflower. That's added refined sugar. And if you don't believe it, start looking at USDA labels that are on foods we eat where it says sugars. Now, I don't mean to imply that you in Washington are eating that much sugar, but in New York, Philadelphia, and unfortunately in New Orleans, my hometown, they definitely are. Now let's look at what we eat, because there's a lot of confusion. But no matter who fixes it, where it's prepared, or how much it costs, we eat carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and fiber. Carbohydrates are broken down to sugars, about 80% glucose, and the rest fructose and galactose, simple sugars. Fats are broken down to triglycerides, proteins to amino acids, and fiber is cellulose. Our digestive tracts do not absorb fiber, but fiber plays an important role, as we will see, in our digestion. Now, sugars, amino acids, and triglycerides are presented to our metabolic computer. Our metabolic computer is our liver. Our livers, as we know them today, developed 400,000 years ago. Unfortunately, we can't take our metabolic computer into the computer superstore and have an Intel Pentium chip put in. So when we overload this computer, what happens? We start having medical problems. Now, this computer is programmed by 2 important hormones, insulin and glucagon. Insulin is secreted by the beta cells of our pancreases in response to a carbohydrate or sugar meal. We cannot live without insulin, but we can live much better without too much insulin. What does insulin do? Well, it facilitates the transport of glucose across the cell membrane so that we can get sugar in the cell for an energy source. It promotes the conversion of glucose to glycogen and fatty acids in the liver, and it promotes the storage of free fatty acids as triglycerides in fat cells. Yes, we start out with sugar, and under the influence of insulin, we end up with fat. Insulin also blocks hormone-sensitive lipase, which helps us burn fat, and insulin stimulates our livers to produce cholesterol. High insulin levels do two other things. They act on our blood vessels to produce aging or arteriosclerosis, and they act on the muscle of our hearts, predominantly our left ventricles, to produce cardiac enlargement or left ventricular hypertrophy. As a heart surgeon, these are two things I can tell you you do not want to have. Let's look at glucagon. Glucagon is secreted by the alpha cells of our pancreases in response to a protein meal. It helps us break down glycogen, that first storage form of glucose, and it helps us break down triglycerides or fat to fatty acids. This is the form of fat that we can burn as an energy source. Let's look at what happens to consume sugar, any sugar, all sugar. A few milligrams maintains our blood sugar, which is always kept within a precise range. Several hundred grams is converted to glycogen, which is stored in our livers and muscle, but many kilograms is converted to fat. And remember, it's 2.2 pounds to the kilogram. What is the Sugar Busters diet concept? We want you to eat in a fashion so that you modulate your insulin secretion downward and you modulate your glucagon secretion upward. If you could do this by eating pecan pie and Haagen-Dazs ice cream, so be it, but I can't. Sugar Busters is not anything new. It is an existing way of eating which we have validated with current medical knowledge of biochemistry and physiology. Now let's look at what happens to glucose, insulin, and glucagon after you have a high carbohydrate and after you have a high protein meal. As you would expect, after a high carbohydrate meal, glucose goes up. After a high protein meal, glucose stays relatively flat. Insulin after the high carbohydrate meal goes up, and you would expect that because insulin tracks glucose. After the high protein meal, insulin moves very little. After a high carbohydrate meal, glucagon, which helps you burn fat, is actually depressed. But after the high protein meal, look what happens to glucagon. It goes up. Glucagon helps you burn fat. Is there any scientific verification for the harmful effects of high insulin level? Absolutely. The Bogalusa Heart Study, published in Circulation, one of the most prestigious of medical journals, that the first measurable abnormality in young adults before the onset of hypertension, obesity, diabetes, and symptomatic cardiovascular disease was a rising insulin level. Desprez in the New England Journal of Medicine has shown that high insulin levels carry the same risk factor for coronary artery disease as hypertension, smoking, heredity, and the other accepted risk factors. So what is the practical application of Sugar Busters? We want you to reduce your intake of refined sugared products and processed grain products. Now, processing alters a product to its detriment. Have you ever wondered why they enrich flour? It's because they have stripped out all the beneficial components and they have to put it back in. But look at this, what happens to your blood sugar levels with the same gram equivalent amount of whole grain, cracked grain, coarse grain, and fine white grain. The only difference is they have been processed and fiber has been removed. But look how quickly the processed grain or the fine white grain elevates the blood sugar and thus your insulin level. Now, the glycemic index is a characteristic of a carbohydrate which shows how quickly it is absorbed and causes a rise in blood sugar. They're usually broken into three groups: low, intermediate, and high. This is a glycemic index showing several different foods. You will notice the new potato and sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar. If you were to take a baked potato and scoop out the flesh of the potato and fill the skin with table sugar, you get the same glycemic index as if you eat the potato. The blood sugar goes up just as quickly, and insulin tracks it. So the next time you eat that baked potato, think about that. Now, what is the Sugar Busters lifestyle? High fiber vegetables, stone ground whole grains, lean and trimmed meats, fruits, and if you choose, alcohol responsibly and in moderation. Now, Sugar Busters is very concerned about you having too much fat, but we need some fat for the proper function of our bodies. But try to bake, broil, or grill meats rather than deep frying, which involves a fat on oil. And with cooking, pick a cooking oil that is high in mono and polyunsaturated fats and low in saturated fats, such as canola oil. Now, there's some eating patterns you have to follow with Sugar Busters, because if you choose the right foods, you can't eat all you want. You should eat 3 meals a day. Missing meals does not help you lose weight. You should limit liquids with meals, because we only secrete a finite amount of digestive enzymes. And if you drink a lot of liquids with a meal, it will dilute these enzymes and make digestion incomplete and indigestion complete. Moderate portions. We give an example in our book about the dinner plate. Everybody knows what it looks like. It's got a round bottom, flanged sides. Your meat and vegetables should fit neatly on the bottom of the plate. It should not be on the sides, it shouldn't be stacked, and it shouldn't fall over the sides. And when you fill it up correctly once, don't go back and fill it up twice. And if you do that, and we've run experiments with it, you get the exact amount of foods that you should have, and you don't overeat. Fruit is a snack, because fruit only uses 2/3 of the insulin that many other carbohydrates use. Drink 6 or 8 glasses of water a day. We need plenty of water. Don't drink it with meals. I said a little earlier, avoid potatoes, now beets, corn, and carrots. How can a physician stand up here and tell you not to eat a carrot? What is it about the carrot that's beneficial? It's the beta-carotene, the precursor of vitamin A. Where's the beta-carotene in the carrot? It's the pigment that gives it its color. You can get that same beta-carotene from sweet potatoes, from broccoli, from cauliflower, without having to have the flesh of the carrot, which is pure sugar. Next slide. Alcohol does have some benefits. It increases the HDL2 and 3, the good HDL, and it decreases platelet stickiness and also plasma fibrinogen, which makes the blood less likely to clot. And red wine, having bioflavonoids, gives you the added value of decreasing the oxidized portion of LDL cholesterol, which is harmful. But remember, too much alcohol, you have a car accident and an injury, and you're brain dead, you're just as dead as if you had a heart attack. So the risk-reward ratio for alcohol is U-shaped, responsibly and in moderation if you use it. Women have a couple of problems I would like to mention specifically, although our greatest successes have been with women on Sugar Busters. Women are more efficient fat storers because for many of their lives they're feeding an infant or unborn child. They exercise less vigorously, and even if they exercise as vigorously, they don't have as big a muscle mass to burn as much food sources. The Achilles heel is that they snack more frequently, and they snack on all the wrong things. And women taking high doses of progesterone will see that they gain weight, because progesterone is a vigorous appetite enhancer as well as enhancing fat storage. Exercise is a tremendous component to Sugar Busters, because the first measurable effect of exercise, even before you begin to lose weight, is a lowering of the insulin levels and an increase in insulin sensitivity. I'd like to mention cholesterol quickly. From diet, we may take in anywhere from 0 to 400 milligrams of cholesterol a day. We only absorb 40% of that from our intestinal tract, so that's only 160 milligrams. From synthesis, we manufacture in our livers 500 to 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day under the influence of insulin. Insulin activates HMG-CoA reductase, which is the rate-limiting enzyme in cholesterol manufacture. So with lower insulin levels, you manufacture less cholesterol. Next slide. Some before and after pictures. Again, Women have been our greatest success stories. Many have lost over 100 pounds. But Sugar Busters is not just for people that want to lose weight, it's for people that want to eat in a healthy fashion. As a heart surgeon, I'm very concerned about the cardiac risk factors, and Sugar Busters has greatly affected those. We haven't done much for heredity, but I've had patients tell me that if they had to do it over again, they would choose different parents, and I've had parents tell me they would choose different children, so that's a wash. Smoking is obviously bad. Slide, please. But high blood pressure, high cholesterol, triglycerides have been greatly benefited. Diabetes has been markedly improved. We have many patients that are now off all medications. Obesity, stress, and obviously we're looking right at sugar. Remember, most fat on our bodies comes from sugar, not fat. And when you go into your grocery store and see low fat, it usually means high sugar, and high sugar is usually high refined sugar. Has Sugar Busters being accepted? With the current magazine Prevention out this month, they looked at some of the newer diets and they picked Sugar Busters as the best. Sugar Busters involves no additives or supplements. It is about eating lean and trim meats, high fiber vegetables, whole grains, and fruits in an effort to modulate insulin secretion and blood sugar levels downward. It is a balanced diet of 45% carbohydrate, 30 to 35% fat, 20 to 25% protein, with more than 25 grams of fiber. It is logical, practical, and reasonable. It does not involve weighing, counting, or measuring. Try, I think you'll like it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bethea. Our next presenter is Dr. Keith Thomas Ayoub.
What we've heard so far here are presentations on several popular diets. And actually, as different as they all are, they have one thing in common, okay? They all work. They all work. They can all produce weight loss, and they actually do it all the same way. Slide, please. Slide. Oh, slide. No, actually not, it's PowerPoint slide. Well, until they get the slide together, I'll tell you how they work. They all cut calories, okay? I can hear that. And the bottom line is that that's the only way anybody is ever going to lose weight, okay? You cut calories. You have to burn more calories than you eat. There are also, in addition to these diets, lots and lots of other studies, and diets actually, that have been effective at producing weight loss. Ask a dieter, their bookshelves are probably loaded with them. I wonder how many diet books they've bought after they bought the diet books up here. I wonder sometimes. And actually, I should say next slide, please. Okay. You know what? Looks like we're having technical problems. I can fill in for the slides. Trust me. Suppose I told you that I know of a diet that would be absolutely guaranteed to get you to lose weight fast. You can lose weight, you can lower your cholesterol. Okay, you can sleep better. Most people say that they feel better. And many have said that they have more energy. Okay, and I can also tell you it's guaranteed to work on absolutely everybody, no matter what your medical profile. It will work every time. It will be 100% effective at getting you to lose weight. It's fasting. Books have been written about it. We got a slide now? Okay, great. There we go. We have our fasting slide. Anyway, fasting works. Books have been written about it. It's not just in the 60s that books were written about it. It's been written about for a long, long time, hundreds of years. There have been other diets. Remember about 10 years ago, there was the Beverly Hills diet? Whatever happened to that? The one that was going to take us, I think, quote the author, by taking us from hamburgers to hip bones and cheesecake to cheekbones. Well, that went the way of the wind. Probably to chase Manhattan, who knows. Also, back in the 60s, there was the drinking man's diet. I'm surprised this one didn't catch on. You all remember this one? Some of you aren't old enough. I am. I was underage at the time. However, the point is that that's the only way you're going to be able to lose weight, is cut your calories. And you can do it in lots of different ways. We shouldn't be judging these or any other diets based on whether or not they can produce a weight loss, because they can all do that. The real issue here is long-term weight management. Now, I'm here as a representative of the American Dietetic Association, but we don't endorse a diet, okay? We don't have a diet. I haven't written a book, maybe someday, but in a sense, and I'm not a paid spokesperson. I'm a volunteer spokesperson, so I'm really here in the best interest. We don't endorse a diet because we look at the scientific evidence and the research, and that tells us that diets don't work. They work in the sense of you can get somebody to lose weight, but do you want to stay on it forever? Diet, almost by itself, in the word itself, suggests a limitation. It suggests temporary. And controlling weight is a lifelong issue that needs a permanent solution, not a quick fix. There is a slide to that effect, if we can get it, but if you can't, don't worry about it. Now, diets are essentially a quick fix. Managing weight is a long-term issue. It takes a lifetime commitment, and it takes a long-term solution. Now, what am I doing on time? Okay. The diets that we've seen here are chiefly about avoidance and restriction of a group of foods. Consumer surveys about attitudes tell us time and again that people don't want to hear any more about what they can't eat. Okay, then the more foods you eliminate from the diet, the more likely people are to feel deprived, and the greater the chance that their diets are going to be deficient in the very nutrients that can enhance their health. Now, another problem with restricting or eliminating whole groups of foods is the risk or the probability of having an unbalanced diet. Now, a diet that's designed for permanence should, in and of itself, be balanced. If it's not, the solution is then not to go out and design and sell supplements that the consumer can buy in order to correct the diet's deficiencies. The solution is to get a better diet. Okay? You don't supplement a bad diet, you correct a bad diet. And we've heard a lot of talk about the alleged big bad carbohydrate villain, and it's amazing to me that the world has managed to survive for thousands of years, eating such things as beans, rice, potatoes, and whole wheat bread. And first of all, I want to say on the record that we would have absolutely no problem with Americans consuming less white sugar and white flour. No problem with that at all. Okay. I would like also people to also consume a lot more fruits, a lot more vegetables, and a lot more whole grains. Ideal world. But at ADA, we make recommendations based on individual needs, and our recommendations have to be based on sound science. And that's the total body of sound science, not an occasional paper from 30 years ago, as was quoted here today, that gives you the results that we want. We modify our recommendations when research justifies doing so because nutrition is a dynamic field. And an example of this is research recently that supports including somewhat more fat into the diets of some heart patients with high triglycerides. Okay, fair game. But the same research cautions that the slightly higher fat intake should come from mono and saturated fats, such as olive oil, peanut products, etc., not from the saturated fat of pork rinds. What's missing from some of the patients here is solid and sustained evidence. And you may hear from Dr. Ornish that he may be the exception because while his diet is low enough in fat that some people have a problem with palatability when the diet goes too low in fat, he does have some good evidence as to the effectiveness in reducing heart disease, and it's sustained. Now, some of the other presentations here have been offered to consumers as near panaceas without the solid evidence first. And this is backwards. Okay, it runs contrary to good practice. The usual order is to get evidence that can stand up to scientific scrutiny and then present it to the public, not the other way around. Consumers are entitled to that, and a responsible health professional will consider this necessary. You don't want to make your claims and then go later on and go and try to get a study together that proves what you've been saying for a long time. Rather than focus on unbalanced or overly restrictive diets that leave out many foods that people enjoy, many basic foods, we need to focus on finding the best ways to help people make long-term positive dietary change and lifestyle changes. And to do that, we need to study the people who've done exactly that, and the National Weight Control Registry has been very helpful in that. It's at the University of Pittsburgh, and they studied people it documents thousands of people who have lost at least 60 pounds and kept half of that off for at least 5 years. That's a 30-pound weight loss over 5 years. And what they did was they had a solid commitment to a low-fat diet. They did a solid commitment to exercise, which hasn't been mentioned here per se today. They also included the high-calorie foods they liked, but they did it in moderation, and they focused on a positive attitude and a balanced lifestyle. And what was interesting is they all lost weight in different ways. Didn't matter. Didn't matter at all whether they did it in groups, individuals, fad diets, whatever. There were no quick fixes. But this isn't a simple thing. And the food guide pyramid is only a guide, as was mentioned here before. It's a guide. Individual needs certainly vary. It wasn't meant to be something based on individual specific needs. But if you eat the minimum number of servings, you'll get 1,300 calories a day about, and you'll also lose weight. You'll also have a balanced diet. And balance is the key. I would like that to be the diet word of the new millennium, maybe balance. We've gone to all the extremes now. Maybe somewhere in the middle, between those two, is where we need to go. A recent Gallup poll found that people, 86% of dieters liked the food guide, the USDA food guide pyramid. They thought it was a common, no-nonsense approach to managing weight in the long term, even though 40% of those people had at some point tried a high-protein, low-carbohydrate diet. Anyway, there's reason for that balance has sound scientific backing, as does the pyramid, lots of it, a mountain of it. Okay, consumers are also advised about the importance of physical activity. Do what you enjoy, but make it a part of your life. Also, remember to take this slow. Slow and steady is what wins. Big changes are temporary changes. Slow, steady changes are going to be more likely to be permanent. And we want this to be a lifestyle, not just a temporary thing. Thank you very much.
Representing the American Society of Bariatric Physicians. And as we start the millennium, you've heard over and over again that obesity is the #1 treatable health epidemic in this country that's killing over 300,000 people each year and every year. The annual direct cost of obesity exceeds $70 billion, as it is associated with a myriad of comorbid diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, strokes, and osteoarthritis. And is representing this 50-year-old organization, which you all may never have heard of, but I hope you know now. This is a group that are physicians and scientists who are dedicated to the treatment of this chronic disease, obesity, and the associated health problems. ASBP is the only medical society that provides continuing medical education for practicing physicians in areas of nutrition, psychology, exercise physiology, behavior modification, and emergent treatment strategies. ASBP's expertise continues to be utilized frequently as a resource for state and federal agencies, along with regional and national media, and that's why we're here today. We recognize that in our heterogeneous, multi-ethnic, and multicultural society, many factors influence the development of obesity. In our fast-paced lives, our quest for quick fixes has led people to seek out simplistic answers or solutions for this complex disease, hence the popularity of the fad diets. Some of the more popular fad diets have identified one nutrient as the offending agent, as we've heard today. In the early 70s and even 100 years ago, it was carbohydrates. Then in the 80s, fat intake was identified as the obesity producer. Consequently, the food manufacturers, with the government's blessings, started massive production of low-fat and no-fat foods. Over the past 20 years, the overall U.S. fat intake has declined from 40% to 34% of total calories. However, the incidence of overweight and obesity has risen astronomically from 26% to over 50% of our adult population. Why? Well, in part because in order to make these reduced fat items palatable, people added more sugar to them and really tended to eat them in unlimited quantities because they figured they're going to ignore those calories. But calories still count. The average daily caloric consumption over this time has increased by about 200 calories per day. In the most recent past, carbohydrates again have been designated as the obesity culprit. But as long as the intake of calories exceeds the caloric requirement, the imbalance in the system results in a net weight gain. This principle goes back to the first law of thermodynamics, which we learned in basic chemistry. So we as bariatric physicians recognize that one nutrition prescription for obesity treatment is not appropriate for, nor is it going to be successful in each and every patient. In medicine, no chronic disease has one singular cause, nor one unique treatment protocol. Does a physician treat every stomach ache with a pill, even though this pain may be due to cancer, an ulcer, or a variety of other diseases? Is every person with hypertension treated with the same medication? And if that medication does not control the hypertension, does a physician just say, keep taking it? Your blood pressure will get better? Would the same exercise program be recommended for each and every patient? The answer is resoundingly no. Therefore, why would I recommend the identical same diet protocol for every patient? In order to formulate a successful bariatric program for a patient, it is mandatory that the physician first evaluate the patient's medical, psychological, family, nutritional, and exercise history, along with the results of a physical examination and laboratory evaluation. After all, the word diet comes from the Greek word dieta, which means way of living. Collectively, ASBP physicians have treated millions of patients, and many of these patients present challenges as they have experienced failures in other treatment programs. Our principles of obesity management include identification and treatment of comorbid diseases along with psychosocial problems, implementation of lifestyle changes including physical activities, and customizing a nutritional plan based on involved food groups. Pharmacological intervention may be included for specific patients as adjunctive therapy. The most effective treatments are developed and adjusted based on the patient's clinical responses and needs. Diets that are too restrictive become impossible to sustain over the long haul. And furthermore, many of the restricted diets that you've heard about are nutritionally unbalanced. Focusing solely on the diet instead of a lifestyle as a method for maintenance of weight reduction has led to miserable failure in the past. The medical literature documents for the maintenance of, or for really that the maintenance of a 5 to 10% weight loss significantly improves obesity-related comorbidities. Obesity treatment in the 21st century should focus on prevention and not just intervention. Obesity has a clear pattern of genetic inheritance that has remained unchanged over the centuries. Yet if we continue at the current pace, more than 70% of our total population will be overweight or obese in the next 20 years. The present incidence of obesity and overweight is disproportionately higher in African Americans, Hispanics, children, and adolescents. According to the National Health and Nutrition Education Survey that was from 1994, the prevalence of obesity or overweight, combining males and females in this category, is approaching 60, 70, 67%, and 25%. Why? Well, to answer this question, all one has to do is observe the following: an abundance of fast food stores with their supersized bargains, lack of safe recreational facilities, latchkey kids watching an average of 32 hours of television per week, elimination of structured physical activity and education classes in public schools, sedentary jobs and lives, increased use of computers. Despite the paucity of funding for obesity research, scientists are currently investigating the role of neurotransmitters such as serotonin and hormones such as leptin in the development of pharmacologic agents for the obesity treatment. These new pharmacological interventions or genetic interventions will have little value if we do not address the social and cultural variables that we know are significantly affecting the prevalence of 21st century obesity. We will literally be fighting a losing battle.
Our next presenter is Dr. John McDougall.
You know, just as we get the slides going, I want to tell you I learned about good diet when I was a plantation doctor in 1973 through 1976. I took care of first, second, third, and fourth generation Filipinos, Japanese, Chinese, and Koreans. My first generation patients who lived on rice and vegetables were always trim. They never had heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis. They were very fit people. But as their descendants learned the rich American diet, what happened to them? They got fatter and sicker. Could I have the first slide, please? So that's where my background is from, is learning it from a practical point of view from my patients 23 years ago. Yeah, okay. The plantation was in Hawaii. It was in the Big Island of Hawaii. It was a sugar plantation in a place called Honoka'a, and it was a wonderful experience. The nice thing I learned as time went on was that if you stop doing the things to people that make them sick, then they get healthy. Kind of medicine that I've been practicing for many years. Just like somebody who stops smoking cigarettes, what happens? Is their cough, their wheezing goes away. And you stop burdening people with a rich American diet, what happens? Okay, my first question is, why are we debating? You know, I thought this was all settled. The Surgeon General there we go. Okay. The Surgeon General of the United States in 1988 issued a report on diet and health in America. And he said 5 of the 10 leading causes of death are due to our diet, including obesity. And he said very clearly in his conclusions that it's due to the disproportionate consumption of foods high in fats, often at the expense of foods high in complex carbohydrates and fiber. So why are we heading in this other direction? I don't understand. You've heard that carbohydrates are bad for you. And if that were the case, when you looked to Japan, you'd see fat, sickly, lethargic people. And when those Japanese people moved to Washington, D.C., they'd get trimmer and healthier as they decrease their rice intake. Is that what you see? No. I was at a restaurant recently, and to my left at a table sat some first and second generation Japanese people eating rice, looking trim, healthy, and young. On my table to the right sat some third and fourth generation Japanese people. What happened? Did they change their genetics? They now eat less carbohydrate, less rice, and more protein, fat, dairy, and meat. You can see this. You don't have to be. Just look around. What you see worldwide is that in countries where people eat high carbohydrate diets, Africa, the Middle East, the Far East, they're trim, they have low rates of heart disease, breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. And when they move to the United States and Western Europe and they abandon their high carbohydrate diet, they get fat and sick. You know, the first case of rheumatoid arthritis was described in Africa in 1957, and the first case of lupus was described in Africa in 1960. Today in the United States, the highest incidence of lupus and rheumatoid arthritis is among the African American people. What happened in 40 years? Now, the high protein diet books, they're all the rage, aren't they? For the last 9, that's what it's been. The most popular books. Well, there are some reasons for it. It's easy to follow a high protein diet. You just throw away the hamburger bun, right? And they have done some good. They've made people aware of the harmful effects of sugar and refined foods, and that's very important. And people have lost weight, sometimes quickly, but rarely permanently. All high-protein diet books blame obesity on too much insulin, as you've heard today. That's the culprit, right? That's the evil hormone. Well, do they really? Let's take a look at the research. Suzanne Holt published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 1997. She looked at insulin response to various foods. Brown pasta produces less insulin than beef. White pasta less insulin than cheese. Porridge less insulin than fish. 72 people were studied. This is from the Pritikin Institute. They put them on a 3-week intensive diet and exercise program. 80% carbohydrate. These were diabetics, insulin-resistant people, normal people, and they cut their insulin levels in half. They also cut their triglycerides nearly in half, too. Now you say, well, that's the exercise. Well, in part it is. But we've known that low carbohydrate, high fat feeding produces insulin resistance. That's what the scientific research says. And it also says that carbohydrate improves insulin sensitivity. Read the research. It's clear and it is consistent. Obesity has been mentioned as caused by too many calories. We're not eating less fat in this country. The research says we're eating about the same. But we're eating a lot more sugar. We're eating more flours. We're going to fast food industries, more snack foods, and we're not exercising as much. And I want to point out in the time that the high-protein diets have ruled, the last 8 to 9 years, we've increased obesity from 12 to 18%. Something's missing. Now, the mechanism for short-term weight loss, Dr. Atkins told you that the way his diet works is similar to fasting. Well, nature is designed us so that if we don't have food and we're starving to death, it doesn't hurt so much to die. So we develop ketosis, which suppresses the hunger drive, a natural mechanism. Ketosis also occurs when we get severely ill, and the reason is we're not supposed to be gathering and preparing food, we're supposed to be recuperating. So the natural mechanism that occurs when you get sick is the mechanism utilized in ketogenic diets, and that's why I call them the make-yourself-sick diets. The other way that they work, the other kind of diets, as recommended by Dr. Sears and the Sugar Busters, is a diet that results in semi-starvation. They invoke complicated rules and restrict foods. And of course, you can't stay on either one of these diets for very long because you can't stay sick forever and you can't be hungry forever. The mechanism for long-term weight loss on a high-carbohydrate diet is the stomach is filled with fewer calories because this is a low-calorie dense diet. Fats are very calorie-dense. Excess carbohydrates are not usually converted to fat, contrary to what you've heard today. Carbohydrate provides a high level of satiety, and fat has a weak level of satisfaction of the appetite. Let me talk about this in a little more detail. Each of the stomachs contains 500 calories. The stomachs at the bottom filled with meat, cheese, and butter barely make a dent in filling the stomach. Whereas the stomachs filled with rice, corn, and potatoes fill or overfill the stomach with the same 500 calories. When you switch from a high meat, high fat diet to a high carbohydrate diet, you decrease the calorie concentration by 1/4. In other words, for the same volume of food, you got 1/4 as many calories. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. The human body does the most efficient thing possible with everything that you give it. So you give it protein, which it utilizes to build things. You give it carbohydrate, which it utilizes to run the machinery. And you give it fat, which is the metabolic dollar that is saved for when food is no longer available, which never seems to happen. Multiple studies and reviews have clearly shown that the body does not convert carbohydrate into fat under ordinary circumstances. It's called de novo lipogenesis. And according to this study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition and multiple studies, dietary carbohydrates do not appear to increase an individual's fat content by de novo lipogenesis. It's too wasteful to do that. But it effortlessly stores fat. In fact, so effortlessly, you can come to somebody, you can stick a needle in their buttocks, thigh, or abdomen, suck the fat out, you can take it to the lab, you can analyze it, you can tell what they like to eat. If they like cold water marine fish, they'll be full of omega-3 fats. They like margarines and shortenings, they'll be full of trans fats. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. As far as satisfaction of appetite, do you know that the potato, which has been maligned here today, is among the most satisfying of all foods? It is 7 times more satisfying than croissants and twice as satisfying as cheese and beef. Yeah. And fat has a very, very poor effect on satisfying the appetite. This has again been shown in multiple studies. Go to the National Library of Medicine, read it. It's clear and consistent. The satiating effect of fat is weak, and carbohydrate-rich breakfast may assist weight control efforts by maintaining fullness. Yes, and John Blundell tells us that eating fat results in passive overconsumption and a disproportionate weak effect on satiety. In my patients, I run a clinic at St. Helena Hospital where people eat as much as they want. They eat 3 times a day. They eat wonderful meals. And the average weight loss for overweight men is 5.3 pounds in 11 days. And women is about 4 pounds in 11 days. I just finished a 1-year study for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, and we found an 8% reduction in weighted patients at 1 year. That's a 16.5 pound weight loss. The National Weight Control Registry was mentioned, very important study. The important thing for you to know is they studied 450 people, and those who were able to keep 30 pounds off for more than a year consistently ate a low-fat diet, which is a low-energy diet. In fact, 80% of them ate less than 30% fat, and 30% of them ate less than 20% fat. There's where the long-term results are. We also get cholesterol changes that are significant and important. We get a 29-point drop in cholesterol in 11 days at the clinic. If you start with high cholesterol, we get a 65-point drop in cholesterol in 11 days. And our triglycerides also drop. There's an average of a 10-point drop in triglycerides, but if you start with high triglycerides, say over 600, they drop on an average of 311 points. Now, the diet I recommend is a starch-based diet with the addition of fruits and vegetables. It is a traditional diet. It's what most people who have ever walked this planet have consumed. A diet of rice for Asia, a diet of pasta for Southern Europe, a diet of breads for Northern Europe, a starch-based diet with the addition of fruits and vegetables. Now, throughout history, this is what most people consumed, except on special days, on holidays, on festival days, and then they celebrated. They danced in the street, they took the day off work, and maybe they'd roast a pig and have a feast. Now, most people could only do this on occasion, but in every society there were some rich people. And they had so much fun at that party that they took that idea up to the hill and up to their castle, and they feasted 3 times a day, 7 days a week. And do you remember what these aristocrats, kings and queens looked like? They look like Americans. That's what they look like. That's how I was raised. I started out every morning with Easter. I went on to Thanksgiving and Christmas for lunch and dinner. Every night after dinner, I had a birthday party. And that is the problem. We need to put rich food back into special occasions. If you're tired of looking like a king and queen, then what you need to do is eat a starch-based diet, as the humankind has millions of years. Thank you very much.
By these days when I'm having dinner, whether it's with the Secretary of Agriculture or with whom, and people ask me about the high-protein diets, they usually also comment on what I'm eating or apologizing for what they're eating or something like that. And I just feel sad that so many people are getting information that's really based on half-truths, nutritional half-truths. And to me, the point of science is to help people sort out conflicting claims. And so this morning I want to go through with you what I think the science is. I think it's also interesting that, to me at least, the order of presentation was from the most unhealthful to the most healthful diet so far. And life is like that sometimes. But having seen what a powerful difference changes in diet and lifestyle can make, it makes me want to pull out what's left of my hair when I see these claims that are being made and so many people changing their diets in ways that I think are hazardous to their health. You know, telling people that pork rinds and sausage is good for you is an appealing way to sell books, but I think it's irresponsible. And I think it's dangerous for people who follow those advice. And I know that's strong words, but I want to try to substantiate that. And I mean nothing at all disrespectfully, but I do want to try to say things as clearly as I can. Let's see here, if I can do this. I think, does that work? Great. So the idea is that high animal protein diets, I think, are hazardous to your health. And in a way, all of my work and my colleagues' work at the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute is based on turning off the faucet, of treating the cause of the problem. Now, sometimes you do have to mop up the floor, but we also need to treat the cause. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. You know, 7-Up flushes out cholesterol. The cartoon says, I've got some good news. While your cholesterol level has remained the same, the research findings have changed. And so people get confused, and it's understandable. Whether you're reading the New England Journal of Medicine or coming to a debate like or reading the National Examiner, it's still the same issue. But if you actually look at all of the data, what you find is really not how conflicted, but how consistent that a meat-based diet is not as helpful as a plant-based diet. And here are just some of the reasons. First of all, you only find cholesterol in meat, which tends to be high in saturated fat, total fat, and oxidants, whereas a plant-based diet has no cholesterol, low in saturated fat, low in oxidants, high in antioxidants, high in fiber, which we will talk about more and some of the panelists have already talked about. And there are literally 1,000 substances, McDougall alluded to earlier, that have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, and even anti-aging properties. And where do you find them? You find them in a plant-based diet. Phytochemicals, bioflavonoids, carotenoids, retinols, isoflavones, genistein. There's a whole alphabet soup of these, and they're powerful. So when you switch from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet, in short, you get a double benefit. You stop eating those foods that cause disease, and you also start eating foods that are actually protective. Now, we've heard that, you know, the Mediterranean diet, the people in France and so on, are healthy, and that's true. But health better doesn't mean optimal. Optimal is an Asian diet. As Dr. McDougall mentioned, people in Japan and Africa, heart disease is as rare there as malaria is here, until they move here and they begin eating and living like we do. And it's not just heart disease. Breast cancer in women, prostate cancer, colon cancer, you find the same patterns there as well. In fact, you can graph intake of dietary fat on the x-axis against the incidence of breast and prostate cancer by country, and you find the same patterns. The highest intake of saturated fat and cholesterol, like in the United States, the UK, Scandinavian countries are the highest. The Eastern European countries and the Mediterranean diets are in the middle, and on the lowest end of the spectrum are the Asian countries. Now that's changing, and there's a globalization of illness that's occurring as people begin to, they see the United States as a superpower, they want to live like us, and now they're starting to die like us, and it's all avoidable and really unfortunate. And I think we could get a globalization of health instead of a globalization of illness. You can look at a number of animal studies. For example, in this one, they actually injected carcinogens into rats, and they found when they put them on a typical American high-protein diet, the higher the dose of the carcinogen, the more cancer they got. That's what you'd expect. But look at the rats that were fed a low animal protein diet. They didn't respond to the carcinogens in the same way because there are protective elements in a plant-based diet that help to prevent that. The cartoon says, "My only consolation is that by eating us, they're killing themselves." All right. So I recommend a whole food, low-fat, plant-based diet. You can actually lose even more weight, lower your cholesterol even more than on the high-protein diets. You don't get the exaggerated insulin response that we'll talk about earlier. There's strong science, not only from our work, but from many others to back it up. And as I mentioned, it's low in the substances that cause disease and high in the ones that are protective. Now, the cartoon says, "I'm going to order a broiled skinless chicken breast, but I want you to bring me lasagna and garlic bread by mistake." Now, sometimes people say, "Oh, yeah, but no, am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer if I eat a low-fat diet?" It's not palatable. But the answer is you can eat low-fat foods that are delicious, and you can eat high-fat foods that are awful. It's really how you make the food that's more important than whether it's low-fat or not. Many people have switched from regular milk to skim milk or low-fat milk. At first, the skim milk tastes like water. After a couple weeks, it tastes fine. You go out to dinner and they feed you whole milk. It tastes like cream. It's too greasy. Of course, the cow didn't change, but your palate adapts to fat. And if you move to, in fact, one of the reasons why I think it's often easier to make big changes than small ones is that you begin not only to feel better, but your palate begins to adapt and you begin to prefer low-fat foods. It says, "I give smokers a discount because there's not as much to tell." And here again, fear of dying is not a good motivator, but joy of living is. When you make big changes in your diet and lifestyle all at once, most people feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for changing diet and lifestyle from fear of dying to joy of living. You feel better. Your brain gets more blood flow, so you can think more clearly. You've all experienced what it's like to eat a big Thanksgiving high-fat, high-protein meal. You feel tired or sluggish an hour or two later. It's not the pasta that makes you sluggish, it's the fat. It clogs up your brain. It clogs up the arteries in your heart. So even a single meal, the American Heart Association has shown, even a single meal high in fat and cholesterol makes your arteries constrict and your blood clot faster. And also it can cause sexual dysfunction. Viagra was the most popular drug of all time last year because it's a big problem in this country. A number of studies have shown that when you eat a high-fat, high-animal protein diet, it's not just your heart that gets less blood flow. And when you change your diet, it improves other areas as well. And for many people, that's a whole lot more meaningful than telling them they're going to live to be 86 instead of 85. Now, let me talk about the work that my colleagues and I have done for the last 23 years to see if heart disease could be reversed by changing diet and lifestyle. What did we find? The first study I did back in 1977-78 when I was a medical student at Baylor in Houston, and we took 10 people, all of whom had bad heart disease, put them in a hotel for a month and put them on this diet and lifestyle program. And we found that their chest pain went away in most cases. There was over a 91% reduction in angina or chest pain. But they not only felt better, in most cases they were better in ways we could actually measure. And we weren't talking about risk factors, we were talking about the disease itself. And I'll come back to that point because it's a really important one. On the left you see a picture of a man's heart. The more bright it is, the more blood flow the heart is getting. So around 10 o'clock where it's dark, you see there's not any blood flow there. In the picture on the right, just a month later, that area that wasn't getting enough blood flow was more normal. And that was just 10 patients, no control group, but it got me interested in doing this. So I went back to school, and after finishing medical school, did a second study in 1980, and this with Dr. McClanahan and other people who are here tonight. And we found that using a randomized control study, using a test that measured how well the heart was pumping blood, it actually got better in the month in the experimental group, got a little worse in the control group. The differences were highly significant, and we published that in the Journal of the AMA in January of 1983. After finishing that, I moved to Boston to do my medical training, then moved to San Francisco when I finished that. And we did a third study called the Lifestyle Heart Trial. And we wanted to know, first of all, could people do this in the real world, not just when you had them in a hotel? What happened over a year, and then we got funding from the NIH to extend it for 4 more years? And what happened to the blockages in the arteries? And we used these high-tech, state-of-the-art 21st century diagnostic technologies like quantitative arteriography and cardiac PET scan to prove the power of this very ancient and low-tech and low-cost diet and lifestyle program. And overall, we found there was almost a 40% reduction in LDL cholesterol, not the 3 to 5% reductions that you find on the high-protein diets. We found a 91% reduction in the frequency of chest pain in the first month. And we found again that they got better and better over time. The control group was following a 30% fat step 2 diet. Their arteries got worse after 1 year and even worse 4 years later. Whereas the experimental group got better and better. Not every patient got better, not every lesion got better. But overall, the more people changed, the better they got, and overall they got better and better instead of worse and worse. This is an example of one man who at the time was 73, had severe heart disease in all 3 of his major coronary arteries, was told he needed to undergo bypass surgery. I'm sure Dr. Bethea would have done a great job if he had gone to him. And I want to make it clear, I'm not against bypass surgery or angioplasty. They can be life-saving. But even then, we have to treat the cause. We have to turn off the faucet. Now, here's a picture from his angiogram. On the left, you can see where it's narrowed, and on the right, a year later, it's less narrowed. Now, those aren't huge changes, but even moderate changes in the blockages can cause dramatic improvements in the blood flow. And the PET scan, as you can see here on the bottom left, blue and black means no blood flow, and on the right, orange and white is maximal blood flow. Clinically, he literally could not walk across the street without getting severe chest pain. By the end of the first month was completely pain-free. By the end of the year was climbing more than 100 floors a day on a Stairmaster, and that's not unusual. It's really part of why it's easier for people to stay on a program like this, because you can make big changes, but the improvements are correspondingly big. And the more people changed, the better they got, both at 1 year and also 4 years later. I thought the younger patients with milder disease would be more likely to show reversal, but I was wrong. The oldest people did as well as the younger ones. I got this as a holiday card 2 years ago from 2 of the patients in one of our programs on the East Coast. These are 2 brothers. The younger brother is 85, and the older one on the right is 96. And they wanted to show me how much more flexible they were. And then the following year, they sent me this one just to show me how much better they got. So you just never know what's possible. Dr. Gould, Barry Sears mentioned that Dr. Gould doesn't believe in this diet. We have some minor differences, but by Dr. Gould's own analysis, 99% of the patients stopped to reverse the progression of their heart disease, so I don't think that's so shabby. We also found that 8 of 8 patients who were on the heart transplant list showed enough improvement that they were able to get off of it. And again, their ejection fractions improved by echocardiography, their blood flow to the heart improved by PET scan, and their myocardial viability, in other words, how many of the cells in the heart were actually functioning, got better. You can see on the well, there's really not time, but just the more red means better, so you can see how much better these people have gotten. Now, that's only 8 patients and not a control study. We're planning a randomized control study, but it's indicative of how powerful, you know, on the one extreme of the spectrum, someone's waiting for a heart transplant, they were able to avoid it. Now, the cartoon says, I can operate or you can go on a strict diet. He says, well, you better operate because my insurance doesn't cover a strict diet. So we've been working with insurance companies. Through our nonprofit institute, we've trained sites around the country. Mutual of Omaha was the first to cover it. There are 42 companies that are covering our program in the sites that we've trained. Highmark, which is Western Pennsylvania Blue Cross Blue Shield, is both providing it as well as covering it. And not just in San Francisco, but in Omaha and Des Moines and Columbia, South Carolina, where they told me gravy is a beverage. This will be a big change in our diet. And we found that they were able to follow it. The program was a year long, but we followed them for 3 years, and we found that almost 80% of the people who were told they needed a bypass or an angioplasty were safely able to avoid it. And because of that, the insurance company saved almost $30,000 per patient. And we published this in the American Journal of Cardiology a little over a year ago. Now, we also found that the LDL levels stayed down. There wasn't a transient phenomenon. Again, the program was only a year long, but we followed them for 3 years, and the LDL stayed down during that whole time. Now, a number of the panelists have made reference to the fact, and this is to me where it becomes a dangerous half-truth, that HDL levels may go down on a diet like I recommend. And indeed, they do go down initially, but look what happens over a longer period of time. And that's why it's important to do studies for more than 8 weeks or more than 10 weeks, as most of these studies that they were quoting, but to follow people for longer periods of time. And conversely, the triglycerides in some patients do go up a little, but again, over a longer period of time, they also go down. Now, this has particular implications for women. Dr. Susan Blumenthal, the Assistant Surgeon General who's here, had a conference a year and a half ago on women and heart disease. And what came out of that is that, of course, women is heart disease by far the leading cause of death in women. They're much less likely to get operated on. When they do, they don't do as well. But if anything, women seem to be able to reverse heart disease even easier than men. So this has particular implications and benefits for women. Now, we're doing a study in collaboration with Dr. Peter Carroll at UCSF and Dr. Bill Fair at Sloan Kettering to see whether prostate cancer might be affected through a similar kind of intervention. And see, I'm a scientist, and the people I work with are scientists, because science can help us say, okay, this sounds good in theory. What happens when you actually do this in a randomized trial, which is the most rigorous approach? Well, Dr. Fair, who was chief of urology at Sloan Kettering, did a study, and he injected prostate tumor cells into rats, actually into mice, and they grew very quickly on a typical American diet. And then you can see on the blue line, those mice that were kept on a 40% fat typical American diet, the tumors just kept getting bigger and bigger. But when they got the fat intake down around 10 or 11% or below, the tumors stopped growing, or they even shrank in some of the mice. Now, so what we're taking is men who have, and this, by the way, is not something that I want reported in the media because we're still in the middle of the study, but I thought it was important to show here, just to show how important these things are. And I know, but it's still, we're in the middle of a study, so it's not really ready for prime time, you might say. But we're taking men who have biopsy-proven prostate cancer, who've elected not to be treated conventionally. Half of them go on our program, half of them don't. Overall, the PSA levels are going up in the control group. They're going down in the experimental group. But even more, and PSA is a marker of prostate cancer, considered the best available. We found the same pattern, that the more closely they followed the diet and lifestyle program, the lower their PSAs went. And in order for the PSAs to start going down instead of up, they had to make big changes. Just like to reverse heart disease, you have to make big changes. Now, I have a reversal diet and a prevention diet. You know, the old saying about an ounce of prevention is true. You don't have to make changes as big to prevent disease, but once you have it, the reason why we were able to show you could reverse heart disease is that we went further than most people did, along the lines of what Dr. McDougall recommends and others. We have one patient as an example, who's not only his PSA went down, but his MRI and his spectroscopy seems to show that his tumor activity is improving. Now let's talk about weight, because clearly that's a big issue here. This is one way to lose weight. It's very effective. What's wrong with this picture is, I don't know if you can see, but she's sitting on a chair while standing on a scale. The problem with most approaches to weight loss is that they all work in the short run, and virtually none of them work in the long run. In fact, the government, the NIH Nutrition Coordinating Committee, about 7 years ago, found that within a year, 2/3 of the people who lost weight gained it all back. Within 5 years, 97% gained it all back. So it's no big deal to get people to lose weight in the short run. That's why I say, show me, as Barry Sears would say, show me the data. Show me the long-term data that these approaches can help people lose weight and keep it off. Now, the half-truth here, the big lie that gets repeated over and over again in all of these books, is that carbohydrates are bad. Carbohydrates are bad because they get absorbed easily, they make your blood sugar go up, your pancreas makes insulin to bring it back down, and the insulin has other effects that aren't so good, which, you know, in some cases can accelerate the conversion of calories into fat if you eat enough carbohydrate, can stimulate HMG-CoA reductase and make your liver make more cholesterol. That's all true. But then the goal then is not to say, and that's what makes it so dangerous, is that it's half true. But the goal is not then to say, okay, so go eat pork rinds and pork chops because it won't provoke an insulin response. Insulin is only one of many factors that affect your health. It's not the key to everything. It's just one factor. The goal is to go from eating simple carbohydrates to complex carbohydrates. As Dr. Bethea very clearly showed, when you refine carbohydrates, when you go from whole wheat flour to white flour or brown rice to white rice, you remove the fiber and the bran that slow their absorption so they get absorbed quickly. But fruits and vegetables and grains and beans and soy products are rich in fiber, which slows the absorption. You don't get that rapid rise. You don't provoke an insulin response. And so you don't have to go away from carbohydrates, but you want to eat a diet that's predominantly whole foods. And as Dr. Bethea said, avoid sugar, white flour, white rice, moderate alcohol, and so on. And again, from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, as Dr. McDougall mentioned, it's not just the glucose response, it's also the insulin response that they're all talking about. Now, it turns out that beef protein is as potent as glucose in stimulating insulin production. So it doesn't make sense to eat a high animal protein diet, even from within the own frame of reference that people are talking about. Now, calories do count, but as Dr. McDougall mentioned, fat has over twice as many calories as protein and carbohydrate. So if you go from a 40% fat to a 10% fat diet, even if you eat the same amount of food, you're getting a third fewer calories. Most weight loss diets are based on counting calories, restricting portion sizes. Sooner or later, people get tired of feeling hungry and deprived. They get off the diet, they gain their weight back, and then they blame themselves because they think they didn't have enough willpower or discipline when they were just going about it in the wrong way. If you change the type of food, if you eat predominantly whole foods, low in fat, you don't have to reduce the amount of food. You can eat whenever you're hungry, you can eat until you're full, and you can lose weight safely and simply and easily without hunger and without deprivation. Now, here's a patient who read Eat More, Weigh Less and came to my office about 2 months ago, and he lost 190 pounds from reading the book. So it's not just minor weight losses that you can get. We did find the average person in our heart disease study lost 25 pounds in the first year. They kept off half that weight 5 years later. And I forgot to mention earlier that we're very grateful to the Healthcare Financing Administration because they've recently agreed to begin a demonstration project to see whether we can show that we can avoid bypasses and angioplasties in people in the Medicare population in the various sites that we've trained. Anyway, this is this man's before picture, and this is his after picture. He's the one on the right. And so it's an example that people actually really can lose a lot of weight on a diet like I recommend. Now, the problem with the high animal protein diets is that even if you can lose weight, you're mortgaging your health in the process. They're high in the disease-causing substances and low in the disease-preventing substances. So why do some people lose weight? Everybody's known someone who's lost weight on an Atkins-type diet. And the reason is that people eat so many simple carbohydrates in this country. A study 2 months ago showed that a third of the vegetables eaten in the United States are either French fries or potato chips. Consumption of sugar, white flour, and processed foods have significantly increased in the past 20 years, along with obesity. Again, you can eat a lot of meat instead of the simple carbohydrates to lower your insulin response, but even then it may not lower it as much as people think, and people are mortgaging their health in the process. Also, because you can eat a ridiculous amount of calories, as Dr. Bethea indicated, by eating a lot of sugar. It doesn't fill you up. You can only eat so many fruits and vegetables. You get full before you get too many calories. Now, the study that Dr. Atkins made reference to that Dr. Westman did at Duke, which he was kind enough to share with me, showed some pretty adverse side effects by his own study, that constipation, bad breath, headache, hair loss are not unusual when you go on a diet like this. And if you've ever been around someone on an Atkins kind of diet, it's not a fun thing necessarily, because how does your body excrete toxic substances? Through your breath, through your perspiration, and through your bowels. And so all three of them don't do well on a high-protein diet for that reason, because it's toxic. It's not good for you. Going into a ketotic state is not a healthful way to eat. It may make you so sick that you don't feel like eating, but that's not the most healthful way to lose weight. I do agree with Dr. Atkins and others that some supplements are beneficial, particularly things like antioxidants, fish oil, and so on. And these are all on our website at ornish.com if you don't have time to copy these down now. It's the easiest way to restrict calories by eating foods that are less dense in calories, which can also help reduce tumors in many studies. Now, HDL does go down on a diet initially that's like the one I recommend, but it's a confusion. It's another half-truth or half-lie, if you will. Your body makes HDL to get rid of excessive fat and cholesterol. If you're eating a lot of fat and cholesterol like most Americans do, and your body can't make much HDL to get rid of it, you're at higher risk than someone who can make more of it. But if you reduce your intake of fat and cholesterol to the levels that we're talking about, it's like your body goes, well, there's not as much garbage, I don't need as many garbage men. So your body may make less HDL initially, but that's not a marker of something bad. It means that you're doing something good. And this was a study that Jan Breslow at Rockefeller University said, again, it's inappropriate to include that diet-induced decreases in HDL are the same as people who can't make much HDL when they're eating a typical American diet. There are no data, this is from the New England Journal of Medicine, there are no data showing that reducing HDL in a low-fat diet is detrimental, and it does not give you the same risk. There are only risk factors at best. Even if you accept that HDL goes down, these are risk factors, they're not diseases. The disease is heart disease. When we actually measure the disease, people get better and better over time, as we found. And we found a 2.5 times reduction in cardiac events in people who went through our program, contrary to what Dr. Sears mentioned. When we measure the actual severity of heart disease, the patients showed continued improvement, even those patients who initially their HDL went down or their triglycerides went up. And again, if you look at populations that have low rates of heart disease, like Asia, they have low HDLs, but they also have low incidence of heart disease. You can lose weight in lots of ways that aren't very healthy. You can take chemotherapy or get cancer or AIDS or be an alcoholic and lose weight, but losing weight per se is not necessarily the only thing we need to take in mind. I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to just go through the last slide here, which is that I think we also need to take into account that there are environmental consequences of eating a lot of meat. This is from Time Magazine 2 months ago, that when you have to produce a pound of beef requires 7,000 pounds of water, and there's increasing evidence of the deforestation, the global warming last week that is occurring even more frequently than it did. These things are all interrelated, and it's not just weight loss that we need to be concerned about.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ornish. Thank you very much.
Just very simply,
Just towards the sides, pass them towards the sides, and they'll be collected.
been concerned over the fact that nobody's done a study, so when Dr. Westman called us and volunteered to do a study, we were very, very cooperative and said we'll give all the help we can. And he has first published the first results, I think, last week, and he can tell a little bit about the early returns. I'd like to have that started so we can go on.
We won't have time to do a complete presentation on that study, but that's why I said if you wanted to summarize that.
Well, let him do it, because he's the one that knows.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just briefly.
2 minutes.
1 minute.
Could I have the slides, please?
Dr. Eric Westman, go ahead. Tell your name and...
My name is Dr. Eric Westman. I saw many patients doing this diet, the Atkins diet, in my practice, and gave...
Where are you from?
I'm from the Durham VA Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina. And it's my pleasure to tell you some early results of a study that's going on. This is a 4-month result interim analysis. And are the slides up yet? Okay. Thank you. These are unpublished, published in abstract form. The next slide, please. I'm going to hustle through these slides. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
Please, the next slide.
Our research question was, what is the effect of a very low carbohydrate program on body weight, serum chemistries, and serum lipids over a 16-week period? This was a single-arm prospective clinical trial. The subjects were overweight, otherwise healthy, motivated community volunteers, and the setting was an outpatient research clinic. Like studying a new drug, we first wanted to assess the effects of this program in a healthy population. The intervention consisted of dietary recommendation. We consulted the Atkins Center for their recommendation for nutritional supplements. We recommended exercise and followed them in group meetings. The diet recommendation was to consume fewer than 20 grams of carbohydrate per day. The outcome measures included body weight and body mass index measured at each visit, and we found after 4 months that the program consisting of the nutritional supplements, the Atkins diet, and exercise resulted in a weight loss of 22 pounds after 4 months. The diet composition was a carbohydrate intake of 6 grams per day. 6% per day. That's 22 grams per day, so they followed the diet fairly closely as we recommended. The percent change in body weight after 4 months was 11% in their percent change of body weight. You saw a slide earlier that showed the adverse effects of the diet, which were constipation and halitosis are the main side effects. We did find a significant increase in BUN and a significant decrease in bicarbonate. Most interestingly, we did find a reduction in total cholesterol. We did find an increase in HDL cholesterol of 9% and a reduction in triglycerides of approximately 40%. There was no significant change in LDL over the 4-month period. There was individual variability such that not everyone's total cholesterol improved. 76% of patients had an improvement in their cholesterol, but 23% did not. I've heard people say the cholesterol goes up on this diet, the cholesterol goes down on this diet. In reality, both are right. There were no clinically serious adverse events in this 4-month trial. A sample of 41 subjects who were healthy. Even though this is the largest study to date, the sample of 41 healthy volunteers may not apply to other populations. So we're encouraged by these results, but cautiously optimistic. There was no control group in this trial. We recommend a randomized controlled trial to give higher confidence in these results. We enrolled only healthy subjects, so the effects we saw may not apply to subjects with medical conditions, and closer monitoring for metabolic changes and side effects may be necessary in patients with medical conditions. While this is the longest study of this dietary approach, the 4-month duration of follow-up limits its long-term generalizability. But we were able to conclude in an uncontrolled trial a very low carbohydrate diet program was efficacious for short-term weight loss in motivated, healthy, mildly overweight individuals, leading to an average weight loss of 22 pounds over 4 months. The amount of weight loss correlated with the amount of urinary ketones that were talked about today. Due to the limited number of subjects in clinical trials, we believe it is too preliminary to make a definitive statement about safety at this time. Further research is needed with more sensitive monitoring to determine possible immediate adverse effects and long-term effects of this dietary program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, the last time I debated Dr. Atkins, I chided him for not publishing any research anywhere, so I think this is a good start. It's not a particularly good study, but it's a good start. I'm just glad to say that he's doing research in that there's no control group. We don't know what these patients were eating when they started. I mean, they could have been eating a diet even higher in fat when they started. There's no baseline data at all. There was no change in the LDL. And the only published study that was done of an Atkins diet was done in 1980 by John LaRosa in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association. And they found that the LDL did go up and the cholesterol levels did go up. And so I think that while I applaud the beginning of doing research, I think that we need to evaluate research based on the standards of good science.
I wanted to make one comment, and all of the panelists have said that, you know, we want to give the best information available. I think there are 2 points that need to be made. Dr. Ornish's presentation was superb, and I applaud what he's doing. But I want everyone to realize that atherosclerotic coronary artery disease or vascular disease or hardening of the arteries, whatever term you want to apply to it, is an aging process. When Ponce de Leon failed to find the fountain of youth, we can't reverse aging. What Dr. Ornish and I think all of us are trying to do is slow down the process. But don't go home thinking that if you do this or this, you can prevent coronary artery disease. If you live long enough, you will get it. Second misconception, the comment was made that calories produce fat. Calories don't produce fat. Calorie is a unit of heat. Fat produces fat, protein produces fat, and carbohydrates produce fat. The key is moderation. Don't eat so much of them that you become fat. Thank you.
I agree with everything that you said. I applaud Dr. Bethea. You're helping people become more aware of the importance of limiting the intake of simple sugars. But I do strongly disagree with your statement that heart disease is an inevitable fact of aging. It's an inevitable fact of aging when people eat a diet like people in this country have eaten. But in other cultures, heart disease is quite rare even when people get older. So I think we can give people a more hopeful message that there actually is a lot they can do. And if you can stop or reverse heart disease, then you can probably prevent it. It's not such a leap of faith.
Have you had people who come to you and you'd say to them, I don't think this is for you?
Well, 50% of my patients, I don't think it's for them, because 50% of my patients don't have a weight problem.
Okay, of the people who do have a weight problem. That rarely happens. If the weight problem is serious,
then I'm going to work on restricting carbohydrates. They may have some other problems. I'd never put any two people on the same diet because we do food allergy testing, so we know right from the very beginning which foods certain people have to avoid, and that's not the same in other people. And they may come in with a different problem. I don't want people to think that most people come to me with a weight problem. Only about 10% of the people come to me. It's because I am a cardiologist. Most of the time they come to me because they were told the same thing that David Letterman heard. You've got to have a bypass, only these people weren't intimidated enough to get it right away. They came to see me, and 85% of those people didn't need a bypass after we went on our program. This is why I sort of resent the idea that people are saying that my diet is not heart healthy. If it were not heart healthy, we wouldn't be reversing heart disease and getting these people who were having chest pain on a little bit of exertion out there running and jogging a few months later.
This brings me to Dr. Ornish to follow up on that. Dr. Ornish, would you then, this is a question from someone in the audience, tiny handwriting by the way, with your focus being on disease prevention diet and reversal diet, would you at any time recommend a high protein diet for severely obese individuals? I mean, high protein fasting?
Well, first of all, let me say that I would love to see some data from Dr. Atkins showing that he can actually get reversal of heart disease, measuring the underlying disease process.
We're working on it.
Well, good. I'd
But
love to see it.
we're not as good a fundraiser as you are. We have to dig into our own pockets. That's the problem.
I'm sorry. Carolyn, can I address that issue?
I think with the number of books you've sold, you could probably fund your own studies.
These are the different numbers.
I recommend most people, unfortunately, when they think about the diet I recommend, think about the reversal diet. And it is a strict diet, and I'd love to be able to tell people that more moderate changes can reverse heart disease, but they don't. Every study that's been done where they've looked at arteriography has found that a 30% fat diet, the majority of people continue to get worse. But there is a genetic variability in how efficiently your body can handle fat and cholesterol. And it's a bell curve. The fact the Nobel Prize in 1975 went to Brown and Goldstein to discover the LDL receptors. On one end of the spectrum are the 95-year-old men or women, and you say, what do you eat? And they say, oh, I have 12 eggs for breakfast and a steak for lunch. And you kind of go, well, maybe diet isn't that important. Look what they're eating. But they're so efficient at getting rid of fat and cholesterol, it almost doesn't matter what they eat. And those people who weren't so efficient at getting rid of it never made it to 95, so you have a selected group. On the other end of the bell curve are people with heart disease or high cholesterol. In general, they have fewer LDL receptors, they're less efficient, and so that's why just making moderate cutbacks in fat and cholesterol doesn't go far enough, because they're still eating more than they can get rid of, and it keeps building up in their arteries. So what I tell people is that if your cholesterol level is below 150 consistently, or your ratio of total to HDL is below 4, then either you're not eating much fat and cholesterol, or your body's very good at getting rid of it. Either way, your risk of disease is so low, whatever you're doing is probably fine.
Thank you.
Most people don't fall into that category, and they can begin by making more moderate changes until they get to that point.
Just because it was brought out about Dr. Atkins' claim to reverse heart disease, and he said he's working on the data, but he's been making this claim for a long time.
No, I haven't.
And that's what excuse me.
But I haven't been making that claim.
You just did, and you don't have the evidence to back it up. Now, this diet's been out there for 30 years, or close to 30 years.
And I haven't been able to fund a study. I've asked
Excuse me. 10 million books in print, and you can't fund the study?
Now I can. And I will be the first doctor to dig into his own pocket to do a study. And it will be me, but it was the first time I had
10 million books. You market the vitamins. You sell the vitamins to correct the nutritional deficiencies.
That's true. That's why I'm doing a study now.
I keep saying...
That's why I couldn't do it before.
You market this. I say this is not for the public good. This is marketed. This is a money-making proposition.
Yeah, and I think what happens with tests and research and studies, which is what we've all been talking about, I even wonder, too, what the level playing field is in presenting information. We have found, we have shown, certainly all of us in the press want to know where those statements come from, what they're based on, and is there, in fact, a level playing field when people go and give their presentations? And Dr. McDougall, you haven't said anything in a while, so we'll bring you in. In terms of presenting, everybody can throw up their, Journal of the American, this, that, and the other thing. And does it matter how many you have piled up there to make your diet the best?
This is why I gave an example that no one can deny, and that is you look around the world. What do you see? If I asked you to design a diet and I gave you the world and the populations of people, design a diet where people would be thin for a lifetime. What populations would you pick? China, Korea, Japan, African countries. It's obvious. They live on starch-based diets with the addition of fruits and vegetables, and rich foods are kept to a minimum. And when these people move to the United States or change their diet in their own land, they consistently get fat, heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, and on and on. This is a no-brainer.
But
Also, can I speak on this for 1 second?
Yes, quickly, remember,
Yes.
this is not a long period of time.
What
to
we're
comment.
looking at is saying there are so few long-term intervention studies. There are only 2 to my knowledge. One is Dr. Ornish's lifestyle trial. He did not address the point I brought out, how to explain why he had twice the number of fatal heart attacks, not cardiovascular hospitalization, but fatal heart attacks, in comparison to another recently published long-term intervention trial, the Leon Diet Heart Study, that had 4 times as much fat, but on that arm, those following that diet eating more fruits and vegetables and eating more omega-3 fatty acids compared to control diet, they had 70% fewer fatal heart attacks.
we're talking about...
And keep it brief, Dr. Ornish, if you can.
Sure. We were talking about 1 versus 2 deaths. And in both deaths, Nova actually did a 1-hour documentary where they followed one of the people who died. And he died while greatly exceeding the exercise recommendations. He was on a rowing machine competing against a video game of other rowers, got his heart rate up way past what we told him to, and died while on the rowing machine. That's, what can you do? It wasn't following the program. And the other person who died had gotten off the program completely, was eating the kind of diet that Dr. Atkins and Dr. Sears might recommend, and died while on that. So we have to report all of the data, including the people who didn't follow it.
But Dr. Dornish, you had down here in your paper in JAMA that you had, again, both people in the experimental program who were dying.
Well, of course they're in the experimental program, because if they were in the control group, we wouldn't be asking them to follow the program. That's by definition.
Dr. Bethea?
Still on the cardiovascular disease, keep in perspective that the greatest risk factor to any of us is heredity. And in the Asian countries, it's true that there's a little lower incidence of cardiovascular disease, but remember, this country has the greatest medical capability of the world. And a lot of the other countries in Asia do not have the diagnostic capabilities that we have, so we really don't know. I have been a consultant to the Jakarta Heart Institute, and I can tell you now we're finding that the incidence of coronary artery disease in Indonesia is just as high and may be higher than in the country of the United States.
And who would like to address that? Dr. Atkins, for instance, would you put a child on this diet?
An overweight child should be on this diet because this is going to really keep them away from attention deficit disorder and all the other problems which are associated with unstable blood sugar. It also prevents the craving of sweets, which is the one thing which makes it impossible to get a child thin as he grows up. Once they become a sugar addict, you have a real problem.
Well, I don't think anyone on the panel is disagreeing that too much refined sugar, I mean, again, is this common ground that we seem to be sharing that perhaps too much refined sugar, too much refined carbohydrates is a health problem? But it's just in the... So where's the difference? And let me ask you this. Why does it matter that there is diet disagreement between you? Why would you care that Ornish doesn't agree with you, and why would you care that he doesn't agree with you?
Well, I do care that a lot of people are believing what Dr. Atkins is saying and making choices that I think are harmful to them. And to go back to your earlier question, I think that the way that people can help to reconcile different points of view is to say, what is the science? Are these published in peer-reviewed journals? The whole point of science is to help people resolve conflicting claims by saying, what is the evidence? What is the experimental design? Now, I'm not aware of any studies that Dr. Atkins or Dr. Sears have published in any peer-reviewed journal about anything ever. And, that's important. Now, we also found that we had a 2.5 times reduction in cardiac events. And the reason why a control group is important is so you know what would have happened anyway.
Why do you care that Dr. Ornish doesn't agree with you, or do you?
Well, I really care because I care about the people who are suffering because of all of the misinformation they've heard about obesity and its consequences. These people are being told something which is quite different from the experience that we have in treating people. The experience that we have is one of consistent improvements in health in cardiac symptoms as well as cardiac risk factors. And we see major improvements in diabetes. We see people who come to us taking insulin, and yet 80% of them, if they're type 2 diabetics taking insulin, get off their insulin.
Well, let me ask you to respond, too, to something, the criticism about the body odor and the bad breath and all these things that go with your, because I know you want to respond to that.
There's
And
nothing
also
to
this
respond.
anecdote, can I just repeat this anecdote? Because I have, of course, interviewed people on the diet who perhaps weren't too thrilled with it, and they would say, you know, I was on the Atkins diet, I was on a high-protein diet, I was cranky, I was miserable, I lost a lot of weight, I looked great, but nobody wanted to talk to me.
So what's the point of
Well, I think that's minor. The number of people who actually present that as a complaint to me is so rare. It really doesn't happen. It's quite possible that these people are not taking vitamins or something because the people in my office simply don't have that problem. And if they did, it would be so minor compared to the major problems that they're confronted with. They're confronted with a need to have a bypass. They're
Okay, well, you didn't really answer the
with
question,
diabetes.
but-
They're on 6 or 7 high blood pressure medicines and other medications, and we get them off their medications. This is serious stuff. Whether the sweet smell of ketones is considered bad breath or just sweet breath is a matter of opinion.
Smells like money. Dr. McDougall?
Yeah, I want you to know that
We're
I'm
having
concerned
fun.
about the recommendations for high-protein diets because the foods that are emphasized are the very foods the Heart Association is condemned as causing heart disease, the Cancer Society is condemned as causing cancer, and the Surgeon General is condemned for being the leading cause of death and disability in this country. I'm concerned.
I am concerned about
Dr.
the American
Mathia?
Heart Association's recommendations of Fruit Loops and Pop-Tarts having their seal of approval. If that's their recommendation, I'm certainly happy that they're not in my camp. I wouldn't want them there.
Well, we'll check on that.
Carolyn, I think if we can give the audience and the press something to take away that we all agree on, that'll be a start. And I think that we all agree that the United States, this country, is eating too much refined sugar and too much processed grain. If you can take that away, I think most everyone here will agree with that.
I agree with that.
Carolyn?
How do you eat carbohydrates then? If you're saying eat the ones that are less processed,
saying
and somebody's saying don't eat carrots. I mean, you know.
I'm saying eat the ones that are the higher fiber, eat the ones that are in the grains, eat the whole grains, not the processed and enriched grains. We at Sugar Busters are not against carbohydrates. We need carbohydrates. We can't live without them. We're not restrictive. We're selective. You can make a better choice, and that's what we want each of you to do.
One more comment.
Also, we've heard a lot today about insulin and insulin resistance, et cetera, and how it goes down on all of the diets. And you know what? It does, because when you lose weight, your insulin resistance goes down. Okay, that's the bottom line. Any diet. Lose weight, the insulin resistance comes better under control. And insulin resistance is not due to a diet. It is not due to the carbohydrate. It is not due to the protein or the fat. It is due to obesity. Reduce weight, insulin becomes less of a problem, and that wasn't really cleared up.